Hello and welcome to another video in Foundations of Maternal and Newborn Health. In today's video, we're going to be talking about embryology. Embryology. So in a previous video, we talked a little bit about what ology means. But ology just means the study of. And embryo is a developing baby. So when a baby is kind of growing inside of a uterus, that would be called an embryo. And so embryology is just the study of this developing baby. So in a previous video, we talked a little bit about fertilization, which is when a sperm and egg come together. So if this is your sperm here in white, and in purple is the egg. The egg's much, much bigger than the sperm. The DNA of the dad is in the sperm, and the sperm will bring the DNA into the egg. And the DNA of the sperm and egg will mix. And we talked a little bit about this in genetics, of half of your DNA coming from your dad, which comes from the sperm, and half of your DNA coming from your mom, which comes from the egg. So they each have kind of half a person's worth of DNA. So again, we talked about this in another video, but this whole process is known as fertilization. And so after the egg's been fertilized by a sperm, this becomes an embryo. And then this embryo will continue to develop until birth, when it becomes a baby. And so this whole process of fertilization to becoming a baby, all of this is embryology. So after this sperm and egg come together, they form just a single cell. So this will just be one cell. And you can call this an embryo at this point. The specific term is known as a zygote, but it's not important to know that. So once the sperm and egg come together to form this single cell, the cell will quickly start dividing. So it'll divide into two cells. And then these two cells will divide again, and we'll have 4 cells. And then those 4 will divide, and we'll get 8 cells. And then they'll just keep dividing and keep dividing. And they'll just keep dividing until we get a big ball of cells. So we'll have a big ball of cells like this, and this is about 100 to 200 cells. So quite a bit larger. But this ball of cells isn't solid. It's kind of empty in the inside, or at least partially empty. And so if we cut this ball of cells open, so if we were to take a knife and cut this open, on the inside it would be a little empty. There would be kind of this empty space on the inside. And you'd see 2 different types of cells. So on the inside there would be kind of this little mound of cells, this little cluster of cells. And this is known as the inner cell mass. And on the outside would be what we call the trophoblast. Trophoblast. And so together, this big ball of cells with the inner cell mass and the trophoblast is known as the blastocyst. And so the reason that we talk about these two different types of cells within the blastocyst is because the trophoblast will go on to become the placenta, where the inner cell mass will go on to become the actual baby. So the inner cell mass will continue to grow and become the baby, and the trophoblast will attach to the uterus and become the placenta. So if you had kind of a uterine wall, which I'll draw here in red, the blastocyst will actually come over, and it's still either floating around or it's kind of gently touching the wall. But this blastocyst, and specifically the trophoblast, will start growing into the uterine wall. So the trophoblast will grow into the uterine wall, and this whole process is known as implantation. So this is implantation. And so it kind of makes sense why the trophoblast is on the outside of the blastocyst, because it has to actually fuse into the wall of the uterus to form the placenta. And the inner cell mass will continue to stay in here and divide and keep growing until it forms a full baby. So there are a few more things that I wanted to touch on in this video. So the first is timing. So from the point of when you have this first cell all the way to implantation, this whole process takes just 8 to 10 days. So at this point, the woman or the client won't know that she's pregnant while all of this is happening. And the baby will start to grow at this point. If you want to call it a baby, the embryo will continue to grow at this point. So this whole process happens very quickly. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the concept of products of conception. Products of conception. And so conception is just this whole process of fertilization. So anything that develops from this initial cell of the sperm and egg coming together is considered a product of conception. So your placenta would be a product of conception, the baby would be a product of conception, and there are other things that could be included in this product of conception that we'll talk about in another video. Things like the umbilical cord would of course be a product of conception, the amniotic sac, and even in some cases molar pregnancies where you have something growing in the uterus but it's not a baby. And so all of these would be products of conception.